makes another attempt thinking he could probably get his keys away from him. That's unsuccessful. As a backup, he thinks, I'll grab Chandler's phone. Hold it hostage. He's not going to want to leave without his phone. 20-year-old young man. Who wants to do without their phone? But he holds it. But that doesn't deter him. Chandler still drives off. That driving off will be described as angry, as mad. And we hear witnesses who were there who would describe him as mad. So at that point, Ditz also recognizes that he wants to try to stop this, but he can't drive either. So he gets another young man you'll hear from, Mason McConnell, who will tell you that he had not been drinking that night, so he was safe to drive. So Ditz gets Mason to drive Ditz in his car, and they go looking for Chandler, seeing if they can track him down. They go to the Mill Creek Apartments, which is less than a mile from the fraternity house, to see if maybe he went back to where Chandler lives. Chandler actually lives at Mill Creek Apartments. He is a member of the fraternity. He certainly could have stayed there. I think you will find evidence will imply that clearly. They go to his apartment complex and look around for him, don't see him, and so they double back to the fraternity house. And when they get back to the fraternity house, what they see, Chandler's back there again. He pulled off and he come back. And those and other witnesses describe they see Chandler sitting behind the wheel of that car, stopped back safely in the parking lot of that fraternity house. An attempt to reapproach him to try to stop him from driving happens. Before that even gets anywhere, he pulls off again and he's gone. Next time you'll hear about any direct evidence of where Chandler is when you will hear from 911 callers who will say that they saw a Jeep Wrangler on the stretch of I-40, I-85 driving the wrong way on a divided controlled access highway. All are basically familiar with I-40, I-85. You've seen, at this point, some 15 miles away from Chapel Hill, heading east in the westbound lanes near Eflin, west of Hillsborough, coming back this way. You will hear from eyewitness 911 callers who say that they saw a car coming at them. And they'll describe that driving in detail. You will hear from multiple people who saw, obviously, this being a highly dangerous situation, calling in concerned about what happened. You will hear also from 911 callers who saw the driving and then saw the tragic results of that driving from just west of Hillsborough on I-85, right at about the point where 85 and 40 converge or split, depending on which way you're going. Chandler Kania's Jeep Wrangler ran head-on into a Suzuki driven by Felicia Harris. Felicia Harris was, her front passenger was her best friend, Darlene McGee. We'll hear from family members of both of them. And perhaps most tragically, in the back seat of Miss Harris's car was her 6-year-old granddaughter, Janiyah King, and her 9-year-old daughter, Janiyah King, and her 6-year-old granddaughter, Janice Baer. The collision you will see, photographs, was horrific. Two cars met almost head-on. They did meet head-on, almost perfectly head-on. But Chandler, because he was in a car that was higher and heavier, and because you'll hear that the practical reality is when people are highly impaired, they tend to be the ones who get the least of it, combined with the fact that he had the higher, heavier car. Chandler did suffer some broken bones, no life-threatening injuries. Felicia, Darlene, Janice died instantly. Janiyah survived, but obviously wasn't a good scene for her either. She was partially ejected. You'll hear from eyewitnesses who say she was hanging out of one of the windows when they came upon her. And she had suffered multiple injuries. And first responders there will say that that upon assessment, there were obviously 3 people who died. There were 2 people alive, And then without question, Janiyah was the one who was in a more life-threatening circumstance, and her health was in a more acute stage at that time. You'll hear from people who helped treat her. You will also hear from people who helped the defendant. You will hear that while there were people who were tending to a 9-year-old girl on the ground, wailing in pain, her mother's best friend, and her niece dead in the car, that this man wouldn't stop honking his horn, cursing at the first responders, telling them to hurry up and help him. Repeatedly honking his horn with a car full of dead people in front of him and a seriously, critically injured little girl left out of his window. We'll then hear from the lead highway patrolman on the case, Trooper Foster, who, after Mr. Kania was extracted, said that he, at that point, engaged in the conversation. He smelled a strong odor of alcohol, and you'll hear that that case of Coors we heard about earlier was strewn all about the highway. And based upon his driving and the strong odor of alcohol, he immediately, well, I shouldn't say immediately, after an assessment of the situation, assessed that he believed that he was impaired. And that he engaged him in questions, including asked him for identification, at which time the defendant pulled out an ID. That trooper will testify, seemed to appear that he made a mistake and attempted to pull back the ID. At that point, the trooper said, "No, you need to give me that." And saw he showed the ID of someone else that would have made him 21 years old, but it wasn't him. Said it was one of his brothers. Only assumed that what he meant was one of his fraternity brothers. And he will testify that he appeared definitely impaired. And he will testify that he was able to understand his questions and engage him in conversation at a level that I think he will say surprised him, based upon what he was seeing. And that he asked him if he would submit to a draw of his blood, which he did, for purposes of testing it for impairing substances. You will hear from witnesses who said that blood came back and then he had a blood alcohol concentration of 0.17. Also showed the presence of marijuana. The defendant has entered a plea of guilty to several crimes related to this, including impaired driving. You will still hear evidence of that because it's part of the overall case. And what I ask you to look for is pay attention to all the evidence. And I'm confident you're going to hear from both lawyers. Don't disregard anything unless you're asked to for evidentiary reasons from the judge. Pay attention to all the relevant evidence that you hear. But I would ask for you to look for the things that make this clearly more than just impaired driving resulting in death. We contend that those things are what constitute malice. And you've heard me talk during jury selection a lot about that term. I ask you to look for the things that support that this was an act inherently dangerous to human life, without regard to social duty. We'll hear it in detail later, but look for those things that are clearly above and beyond just driving impaired. For what it's worth, he's also pled not guilty to reckless driving. I will be asking you to look for things that support finding reckless driving. I suspect that I'm confident I'll be able to ask you for a verdict on that. And I'm equally confident that once you've heard all of the relevant evidence, that I'll come back before you and say that the actions of Mr. Kania that night clearly demonstrated malice under the definition that would be instructed. And I will request that you return the verdicts of guilty for second-degree murder for Johnny Baird, Alicia Harris, and John Lindsay. Thank you.
Feel a desire to have an opening statement made at this time.
Yes, sir, Your Honor.
Curious with the defendant.
Thank you. And Your Honor, may I use the podium, please?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Good afternoon. On July 19th, 2015, at a little after 3 in the morning, there was a terrible crash on Interstate 85. Two cars were involved in a head-on collision, and this happened on a divided lane highway. One car was a Suzuki Forenza, and it sustained massive front-end damage from the collision. The force of the wreck instantly killed 47-year-old Darlene McGee, 49-year-old Felicia Harris, 6-year-old Janice Beard, and seriously injured 9-year-old Janiyah King. She survived the wreck, but she had very serious injuries. The other car, of course, was driven by 20-year-old Chandler Kania. He was the only occupant in the Jeep. He broke both his ankles and his left arm in the collision, and he was trapped inside the mangled Jeep as it rested on the guardrail that divides that highway. Just before the wreck, witnesses frantically called 911 to report that the Jeep Wrangler had been driving the wrong way on I-85 for several miles. As civilians and first responders tended to young Janiyah King, again the only survivor in the Suzuki, Mr. Newman is correct. They could hear Chandler honking on his horn, yelling for help. He was unaware of what was going on around him. Trooper Foster, who's seated right there at the Highway Patrol, he was one of those first responders on the scene. When he went to the Jeep, he noticed that Chandler had obvious injuries. He could see him immediately, the injuries. He also noted that Chandler was trapped inside that Jeep. He immediately smelled the strong odor of alcohol on his breath. He noticed his eyes were red and glassy. He saw beer cans that were strewn around the Jeep and on that grassy median that divides the highway. He noted that given Chandler's injuries, he didn't seem to be feeling pain the way someone normally would, given the severity of those injuries. And it didn't take him long. Mr. Neiman's right. It didn't take him long at all. Because what he was looking at is somebody that was 20 years old that was driving the wrong way on the highway for miles. He had a very strong odor of alcohol. He noticed the beer cans that were strewn around the median. And he made note, he wrote it down, that Chandler was unaware of where he even was. He was unaware of even his own serious injuries. He quickly came to the conclusion that Chandler was impaired because he had clearly lost the normal control of his mental and his physical faculties. At this point, the North Carolina State Highway Patrol quickly changed gears from a crash investigation into a criminal investigation of Chandler Kania. In the days and weeks that followed, members of the Highway Patrol, local alcohol law enforcement, they interviewed numerous witnesses, many witnesses. They interviewed Chandler at the hospital as he lay in his hospital bed. They interviewed Chandler's parents that were also at the hospital, of course. They interviewed his friends and fraternity brothers that he had been with the night before. And in essence, here's what they learned. Chandler's from Asheboro. He was a rising junior at the University of North Carolina. Graduated from Asheboro High School at the top of his class. Student body president his senior year. He was in the National Honor Society. When he came to UNC, he went through fraternity rush his freshman year, and he ultimately pledged the Sigma Phi Epsilon House the spring semester of his freshman year. Chandler, Alex Pugh, and Josh Hall, they were all friends from Asheboro High School. On Saturday, July the 18th, they arrived in Chapel Hill after visiting Alex in Wilmington, where he was in school at UNCW. Once in Chapel Hill, Alex, who was 21 years old at the time, he bought a case of Budweiser and an 18-pack of Coors beer for the evening for those boys and also others that they would end up meeting up with later in the night. They dropped a case of Budweiser off at Rebecca Green's apartment, Short-Red Apartments. That's where they had planned to go to a pregame party. You'll probably hear the word pregame a lot as the evidence unfolds in front of you in the courtroom. They dropped a case of Budweiser at Rebecca Green's apartment. Then they went to Chandler's apartment to get ready for the night. There, they each had a couple of beers while they showered up and they changed clothes. Around 9 o'clock, approximately 9 o'clock, Chandler drove Josh and Alex to the fraternity house to meet up with other friends. The fraternity house is located, I know we've talked about it, it's right there across from the Carolina Inn, the corner of Cameron Avenue and Pittsburgh Street. Chandler parked his Jeep right there in the fraternity house parking lot. When they went inside the fraternity house, they drank beer. They texted with friends on heading to Rebecca Green's apartment. That would be the next stop in the evening. At around 10:30, a group walked from the fraternity house to Short-Red Apartments to meet up with others. When they got there were about 15 or so college students there. And most everyone drank the Budweiser beer they had dropped off earlier. And most everyone took shots of liquor, including Chandler. At about midnight, a smaller group walked from Short-Red Apartments to a bar named La Residence. We've heard it called La Res for short. It's one of the favorite bars of the young underage crowd in Chapel Hill, unfortunately. The entire group, including Chandler, used fake IDs to get into La Res, except Alex, of course. He was 21. Everybody used fake IDs to get in. Chandler had gotten his fake ID from an older fraternity brother named Josh Campbell the previous year sometime. As soon as they got to La Residence, a round of tequila shots was first thing in order, purchased by Aditya Shah. Mr. Nate is right, he will be called Ditz. That's what he prefers to be called. That was first order of business once they got to La Residence. I can't recall the number of shots Ditz bought. I believe it's around 8 to 9, but in any event, all those shots were consumed, and Chandler had one of those shots. Around 1 a.m., Chandler and some other friends walked from La Res to He's Not Here, another favorite bar of the underage crowd in Chapel Hill. The group entered He's Not Here with the same fake IDs they used at La Res. Chandler purchased a blue cup. That's a 32-ounce draft beer for himself. He purchased blue cups also for some of his friends that he was with. Now, we believe the evidence will show that at both of these bars, La Res and He's Not Here, there's a pattern where bouncers card people out front, but they do not card at the bar what is called the point of sale as they are supposed to do. But in any event, fake IDs were used by all of the underage folks as they went in both of these bars. After He's Not Here closed at 2, Chandler, Josh, Alex, Ditz, and Case Aldridge. Case Aldridge is a fraternity brother that's new to the mix as far as the story goes at this point. After He's Not closed at 2, that group started making their way back to the fraternity house. When they walked out of the bar, out of He's Not, a fight had broken out nearby, not involving these kids, but a fight had broken out nearby and there were police everywhere. Some of the group walked over to check out the commotion, the chaos that was created by that, and Chandler and Case Aldridge walked on ahead, heading toward the Sigette fraternity house. While they were walking, they got into an argument over a couple of girls. I'll leave it for right now. I think Mr. Neiman did a pretty good job of trying to explain that, but it'll probably take a few witnesses to really understand the dynamic that was going on over there. For our purposes right now, I'm going to say they got into an argument over a couple of girls. But the point is it really should have been nothing more than a silly disagreement. But at this time, it's after 2 a.m. Everybody involved had had a lot of alcohol to drink. That's going to be clear. It is clear. But given the amount of alcohol that Chandler and Case had both consumed, that argument got a little heated. The two split ways. Chandler kept heading to the fraternity house. Case turned around and walked in the other direction. As Case passed by Josh, Alex, and Ditz, they could tell he was mad that he and Chandler had been in some kind of an argument. Again, it was after 2. They had all been drinking, and they were worried about Chandler. So they picked up the pace, and they began running toward the fraternity house to catch up with him. By the time they got there, they saw him getting in his Jeep. He was already getting in his Jeep. They tried to reason with him not to drive. Chandler drove out of the parking lot. He came back a few minutes later and he just sat there. He didn't get out. He didn't talk to any of them. He just sat there. Very short time later, just a few minutes, matter of minutes, he drove out again, of course never to return. This was about 2:30 in the morning, right around 2:30 in the morning. A little more than half an hour later, I'd say more than 30 miles away, the Sig Gap house right on that corner. Chandler was driving the wrong way on Interstate 85. Not far from Lebanon. And he caused the fatal wreck that brings us here today. Chandler was charged with a number of offenses as a result of his actions and his behavior on July the 19th. And I'm going to read through those charges. Please bear with me. 2 counts of obtaining alcohol with a fake ID, 1 for law residence, 1 for he's not here. Those are misdemeanor charges. Underage consumption of alcohol, driving the wrong way on a dual-lane highway, careless and reckless driving, possession of an open container of alcohol in a vehicle, driving a vehicle after consuming alcohol and being less than 21 years old, driving while impaired. Those were misdemeanor charges that I just mentioned. The next charges are felony charges. Felony death by vehicle for causing the death of Darlene McGee. Felony death by motor vehicle for causing the death of Felicia Harris. Felony death by motor vehicle for causing the death of Janice Beard. Felony serious injury by motor vehicle for causing serious injuries to Janai King. But of course, we're here today because he's also charged with murder. 20-year-old Chandler Kania is accused of murdering Darlene McGee. He's accused of murdering Felicia Harris. He's accused of murdering Janice Beard. And as you know, Chandler has already pled guilty to most of those charges that I just listed out. Again, many of them are misdemeanors, but most importantly and significantly, he's pled guilty to many felonies. He has pled guilty to driving while impaired. That is a misdemeanor charge. He has pled guilty to that charge. He has pled guilty to felony death by motor vehicle for causing the death of Darlene McGee. He has pled guilty to felony death by motor vehicle for causing the death of Felicia Harris. He has pled guilty to felony death by motor vehicle for causing the death of Janice Beard. And he has also pled guilty to felony serious injury for causing serious injuries to Janai King. And of course, that leaves us with the remaining charges against Chandler. 3 counts of second-degree murder. And that's precisely the question that faces you all today. Is Chandler Kania a murderer? It's been a little over a year since this tragic wreck happened on Interstate 85. And one can only imagine the pain, the sadness, and the suffering of all the victims and their families and their loved ones. One can only imagine the anger they have to feel against Chandler. It's only human and natural that we all feel sadness over their deaths and young Janai's injuries. We have to. It's only human and natural that everybody feels anger toward Chandler for his actions and his behavior. But it's in the swirl of all of these emotions that we've come together. We've come together in the calm of this courtroom to determine what actually happened and whether Chandler Kania is guilty of murder. And in order to do that, the laws and precious traditions of this state and our nation, they call upon us, they demand that we work above the sadness, that we rise above the anger, and that you reach a decision based on an honest, a fair, and reasonable assessment of the evidence that is produced in this courtroom. The law of second-degree murder, you've heard about it a few times already. At the end of the evidence, Judge Height's going to instruct you on all the law to apply in this case, not just in regards to second-degree murder. But he will tell you that it's the unlawful killing of a human being with malice. I'm not going to define malice for you at this point, but he will at the end of the evidence. It is the unlawful killing of a human being with malice. Judge Heitz will also instruct you on the fundamental principles of our criminal justice system. And you heard my Uncle Wade go through these in jury selection. The presumption of innocence. As Chandler sits here right now listening to my open statement, he is presumed innocent. He is presumed innocent of second-degree murder. He is presumed to have not acted with malice on July 19th, 2015. That's where we start. He is presumed to have not acted maliciously. The burden of proof. The state of North Carolina always has the burden of proof in every criminal case. It's one of the foundations of our country. The state has to prove that Chandler acted with malice on July 19th, 2015. They have to prove it, that he acted maliciously. The burden of proof always remains on the state. It's always at this desk, and it never shifts over to this side of the courtroom. It never does. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt. There's been lots of questions on some questions on what reasonable doubt means. The state's burden is high. It is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I think Judge Height at the end of the case will tell you that reasonable doubt means you must be fully satisfied and entirely convinced. That's what proof beyond a reasonable doubt means. You have to be fully satisfied. You have to be entirely convinced. Now, here's what we ask on behalf of Chandler Kania. We respectfully ask that after you consider all the evidence and you apply the laws of our state to that evidence and the fundamental principles of our criminal justice system that I just went through, that you find Chandler Kania not guilty of second-degree Thank you very much for your time.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, we're going to take our lunch and recess period. Again, when you leave, you're going to need to leave your notes, notepads, and pens in your seats. They'll be there when you return. During our lunch and recess period, it is your duty not to talk among yourselves about this case, not to talk to the parties, the witnesses, or the lawyers about anything at all. It's further duty not to talk to anyone else, to allow anyone else to talk with you, to say anything in your presence about this case. If anyone communicates with you in any way, you need to let us know about it when you come back in. Don't do any individual research or investigation on your own touching on this trial. Do not form or express an opinion about this case. You haven't heard any evidence, so you have nothing to be able to form an opinion on as to guilt or innocence. With that, ladies and gentlemen, while everyone else in the court remains seated, I'm going to excuse the 14 of you and ask that you return. And when you come back, I'm going to get you to assemble in the jury room, and we'll bring you out when we're ready at 2:15 this afternoon. Go by that clock. 2:15 this afternoon, if that's your excuse. The record should reflect the jury's absence from the courtroom. Anything directed today?
No, Your Honor.
Anything directed? None.
No, sir, Your Honor.
Court's in recess to 15.
Court is in recess to 2.
How you doing?
We can leave our stuff in here. So we can leave our things in here.